when you get handed a diagnosis, you think, oh, this just is how it is. I am just somebody that will have anxiety for the rest of my life. I'm somebody that will struggle with ADHD. Oh, I'm dyslexic. It just is what it is. And you're saying that while that may be true right now, the dyslexia, the ADHD, any of these neurodivergent diagnoses that you tend to then have somebody throw medication at you, you're here to say that I completely lost my train of thought because I'm getting so like emotional about this, but you're basically here to tell us that it's not is what it is.
It's not a permanent life. It's not a permanent condition. ADHD can be helped. We can help people heal and recover. There are some neurodevelopmental conditions that are permanent and that are likely not, quote unquote, changeable. So people who lack social skills, they don't take a pill and all of a sudden have great social skills. And then when the pill wears off, their social skills go away again. They permanently have a difference in their social skills. That is likely not going to change, even if we change their brain metabolism.
Are you referring to somebody who might be on the autism spectrum?
Yes.
So what will happen though if you improve a person who has been diagnosed on the autism spectrum and has difficulty making social connection or reading social cues? What will happen though if you improve their metabolism?
So people who are on the spectrum almost always have comorbid DSM diagnostic labels. About 50% will have ADHD. Many of them will have seizures. 60% will have depression and anxiety symptoms. Most of them have OCD symptoms because they're embedded into the diagnostic criteria for autism. A study just came out 2 weeks ago. 10% will go on to develop schizophrenia.
Wow.
People with autism have essentially higher rates of all of the mental health conditions. So although we may not be able to change their social skills, if we improve their brain metabolism, we can improve many of those other symptoms. We can reduce their ADHD symptoms. We can improve their capacity to learn. We can improve their mood and energy, reduce their anxiety, make them feel better, think better, be more positive, have more energy. It can make profound differences in their lives if we intervene early enough before social skill development is complete.
And what age is that?
The earlier, the better. So social skills start developing from birth. If we know that there are problems, the sooner we can intervene with brain metabolism strategies, we might be able to reduce symptoms or improve symptoms or modify the course of illness. But after childhood, people have either learned social skills or they haven't, or they've learned different social skills. It's not that it's all or nothing, but there are differences. And those differences are going to be difficult, if not impossible, to change. And we shouldn't expect to change them.
I would imagine if you achieve a reduction of feelings of depression or bouts of anxiety, that though makes somebody feel remarkably better, even if they're not connecting socially with people. You know what I'm saying?
No doubt about it. And let me be clear, there are many people who are autistic who have tremendous strengths and invaluable traits to the human species. Some of our most notable geniuses, billionaire businessmen, and others are supposedly on the spectrum. And we as a society would not be thriving in the ways that we are if we didn't have Albert Einstein, if we didn't have other current ones, I won't name names, but other current ones who have self-disclosed that they have received that label when they were young. Because because sometimes it comes with benefits. It doesn't always, though. There are people who are on the spectrum who have to live in group homes, who are unable to care for themselves, who are having seizures, who have profound cognitive impairment, who are injuring themselves repetitively. And I believe that using metabolic treatment strategies, we can help those people. We can help those people live better lives, maybe live more independently, function at a higher level.
I'm intrigued by the fact that you said that ADHD is not a condition that you're stuck with forever, because I have believed that it is. And I have brought that into marriage counseling multiple times. Like, I'm sorry, honey, I'm just going to leave my Kleenexes on the counter, and my vanity in the bathroom is always going to look like somebody shot all of my makeup out of a cannon right on top of the sink. Like, I am forgetful. All of that stuff. I've thought there was no hope, but you're saying there is. So how does improving my brain metabolism help with either inattention or hyperactivity?
It helps with both. So improving brain metabolism is about helping those brain regions that are underactive become more active. And at the same time, if there are brain regions that are overactive, it helps them normalize their activity so that they aren't hyper excitable or overactive. At the end of the day, in a very practical, concrete way,
Yeah.
to someone like you, I would first ask the question, do you really want to change?
No.
And so
well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what it would feel like to be me if I didn't like have ADHD as part of my identity. And maybe what I'm realizing as I'm talking to you in this confessional, Dr. Palmer, is that I use it as an excuse to not have to pay attention, to not have to slow down, to be responsible for the fact that I am a little bit chaotic, both internally in my thoughts and externally. And if I'm being honest, I know that if I work out, for example, and it's one of those workouts where somebody's yelling at you and you're really going for it, and you get that kind of chemical rush that Dr. John Rady, probably one of your colleagues, calls miracle grow for the brain, that I have the same experience of being able to hyper focus for about an hour and a half after I exercise as if I had taken Adderall.
Which is perfect. So,
but I don't want to have to exercise like that every morning, but it's easier to take an Adderall.
No, well, and again,
I'm just being honest.
So both of those are strategies to address brain metabolism. So you're using effective strategies, a stimulant and exercise. Both of those are directly influencing your brain metabolism. You are noticing some benefit. I want to come back to the bigger question that I asked you. Do you want to change? Because at the end of the day,
I want to stop feeling frustrated. And I think when I was younger, and certainly watching our son struggle, you do feel like there's something wrong with you. I see a direct connection between the undiagnosed ADHD and the inability for me to either pay attention in class or focus when I needed to focus, and the fact that mentally I just felt like there was something wrong with me, and anxiety started to develop, and that became the overriding thing that I felt and that people could see. And so I was medicated for anxiety for 25 years until I got this diagnosis around ADHD. And I'm like, wait a minute, maybe it wasn't anxiety as the core issue after all. Maybe it was this inability to focus. And what you're actually offering is a deeper epiphany that maybe it's not actually ADHD. Maybe it's my brain metabolizes differently than other people. And when I pay attention to that in myself or in our son, because he doesn't take medication. He has not taken medication since he was 13. He changed his diet. He's more active. It's as if his entire brain changed.
That's a perfect example of what I'm here to say. So at the end of the day, you are going to be hard pressed to convince me that your ADHD has ruined or impaired your life. You are a ridiculously successful woman who has a full life with a family, a career, impact. And I would never want you to think that your ADHD has stood in the way. Your ADHD symptoms may be the reason you have achieved as much as you have. And so, although the teachers may have said, this is bad, stop behaving this way, smarten up, read faster, what's wrong with you? Why didn't you comprehend that book the way everybody else did? Why can't you sit still? Why are you always trying to show off? Why are you always looking for attention? Now, those very traits may actually be what are fueling your success. And I would really hate to see you medicate away your success so that you can become a mediocre human being.
Right. Dr. Palmer.
We don't want that.
Wow.
So,
well, I'm on the other side of it. So let's also put into context, I'm now 55 and I have been utilizing medication. And what's interesting is I only take it in environments where I think I need it. Like I didn't take medication this morning because I knew that we would be doing this interview, and being in an environment with lights on and microphones, I feel so focused because my adrenaline is going that the metabolism is probably different than if I'm just trying to get stuff done around the house. And so I want to go back though to somebody who feels like their inability to pay attention or their inability to be still is causing anxiety. It is creating a ruckus in their life because having practiced for 30 years, you have seen plenty of people where ADHD is not fueling their success because it's out of control. I have been dying to share a deeply personal story with you. I was diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 47. And I wanted to talk to you about it because I'm not the only person who's been diagnosed late in life with ADHD. In fact, researchers say this is very common with women. And there's an entire generation of women, they've labeled them the lost generation, who have struggled with ADHD their entire lives and never even knew it. And I was one of them. And you may be one of them too. And when I was finally diagnosed, this was just 6 years ago, and I'm going to tell you the whole story about how I got diagnosed because it was by mistake. But when I finally got that diagnosis, it was both a blessing and a curse. It was a blessing because I finally understood all the things that I had struggled with for my entire life. And here's why it was a curse. It was a curse because once I understood the impact of living with undiagnosed ADHD on women in particular, I couldn't help but reflect back on the past 47 years where I was living my life. I had ADHD. I wasn't treated for it. I didn't know it. I felt so much grief about the amount of struggles that I had. And I wondered, things could have been really different. If somebody had figured this out when I was really little, if I had gotten the interventions that really helped someone like me, I know I wouldn't have struggled with anxiety or did some of the things I deeply regret for more than 30 years. That's how big of a deal this has been in my life. And so today we're going to talk about a lot of stuff. You're going to learn the 4 key differences about how ADHD affects boys and girls, and you're going to understand the reason why women go profoundly undiagnosed. You'll learn the surprising way most women find out that they have ADHD, and you're also going to hear about the connection between anxiety, depression, eating disorders, and living with undiagnosed ADHD. And you will get a lot of good news, because there is good news. And there's a lot that you can do to support yourself if you or someone you love have ADHD. And I'm going to focus on the impact on women, but you might not be a woman. I mean, we're in 194 countries at this point with the Mel Robbins podcast. We have fans across the entire gender spectrum, but I want you to listen, and here's why. You know women and girls in your life. And when you hear what I'm about to explain to you, this will help you understand and empower your sister, your partner, your daughter, your girlfriend, your niece, anybody that you know, because this conversation today is going to be full of resources that will help you empower yourself or other people in your life who have either been diagnosed or who haven't been diagnosed and are wondering, what the hell is wrong with me? Because that's basically how I felt for the first 47 years of my life. What the fuck is wrong with me? This is something that happened to me 6 years ago, and it changed the trajectory of my life. It's a story about our son, Oakley. He was in the 4th grade, and I was 47 years old, and he was really struggling in school. And we went through the testing that so many of us go through with our kids whenever they're struggling in school to find out, what are we dealing with? What is the casserole of the brain that is Oakley Robbins? And the school is trying to tell us that he was having all kinds of behavioral issues. He was interrupting class. He was fidgety. He didn't pay attention, blah, 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 blah. But we knew something was up. And luckily, this was at a time in our life where we could afford to go outside the school and get a neuropsych exam. Huge shout out to Dr. Moldover, the GOAT in Wellesley, Massachusetts. And sure enough, he did a neuropsych on our son, Oakley. And the findings were very conclusive. He had profound dyslexia. He had dysgraphia, which is kind of related to dyslexia. These are both language-based learning styles based on your neural pathway development in the brain. And the other thing he was diagnosed with is ADHD. And when I started reading the report, because when you get these assessments done, and I'm sure a ton of you have had this experience either with your kids, or maybe it happened to you when you were a kid, or with nieces or nephews. This is super common for people to go through this. When we got the big report kind of telling us all about Oakley's brain, I was sitting with his pediatrician, Dr. Blumenthal, and I'd known Mark for, 16 years at this point. And we're flipping through the thing, and Mark's going, yeah, this makes a lot of sense, and we were going to talk options about what we could do in terms of therapy or medication or, ways that we could support Oak now that we had a diagnosis about both his learning style, but more importantly, about this attention issue. And I kind of looked at Mark and I said, as I'm reading this, Mark, this sounds a lot like me. Do you think that maybe I have ADHD? And Dr. Blumenthal, I just love this guy. He leans back in his chair and he looks at me with this sort of stunned look on his face. And he's like, do I think you have ADHD? Mel Robbins, of course you have ADHD. In fact, you're probably the most ADHD parent I have in my entire practice. You are so successful and you are a complete bird brain. Do you realize that you will go years and not bring your kids in for their wellness appointments? In fact, every fall we have a joke. We know that you are going to be one of those 20 parents that call in a fucking panic because you need a physical. You need a physical. Your kid's practice starts tomorrow. You need a physical. And now it's a 5-alarm fire, but you've missed their wellness appointment. And you do it every year. And you'll leave every exam and you'll go, oh yeah, okay, I'll follow up. I'll call you tomorrow. I'll tell you about it. You never do. And I just looked at him and I said, and as he was talking, because I knew he was right, I always felt so incompetent about my ability to keep up with appointments or to remember things like that or any of it. And then he goes, so do I think you have ADHD? Of course you have ADHD. And I looked him square in the eye, you guys, and you know what I said to him? Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell me I had ADHD? And he goes, I'm not your doctor, Mel. I'll tell you, I was 47 years old when I realized that what I had been dealing with for my entire life may not be anxiety. It might just be fucking ADHD. And so I went to my primary care. She referred me to a specialist, sure enough, just like my son, dyslexia, ADHD. And I have since learned because, once something happens in my life, I am like a truffle pig rooting for a truffle. I literally start digging until I find something. And I made it my mission 6 years ago to find out everything I could possibly discover about ADHD. Not only because I wanted to help our son Oakley and eventually our daughter Kendall and our daughter Sawyer, but also because now that I understood that I had this diagnosis, I wanted to understand what the hell was going on so I could help myself. And what I learned is incredible. I am part of a lost generation of women who were diagnosed with anxiety or depression or an eating disorder or some other condition in my teens and 20s, when the underlying problem all along was that they missed the diagnosis of ADHD. And that's why I want to talk to you about it. I have wanted to have a conversation with you about this ever since we started this podcast 8 months ago, but I have been reluctant to do it because I wanted to make sure I had resources to give you. Because every time I've talked about this on YouTube or on social, or I've talked about it on a talk show, we receive an avalanche of inbound stories, requests for information. And so I didn't want to unpack everything I'm going to share with you today until I knew I could point you in the right direction. And what we're going to talk about today is really important. It's really important because what the research shows is that when you are not properly diagnosed with ADHD and you have it, the outcomes for girls in particular are horrendous. And the word horrendous is a word that one of the world's leading experts uses, not me. Let me just read this to you. This comes from Dr. Ellen Littman, who's a clinical psychologist, co-author of Understanding Girls with ADHD, and this is what she said. Anxiety and depression turn into low self-esteem, self-loathing, and the risk for self-harm and suicide attempts is 4 times higher for girls with ADHD than girls without. That's terrifying. So the conversation that we're going to have today, it goes way beyond having trouble with homework or having trouble focusing. We'll cover all of this. But I personally believe, as I sit here and I look back on my life, I'm now 53 years old. I was diagnosed with ADHD late at the age of 47, 6 years ago. I look back on my life and I know that I would not have struggled with anxiety the way that I did had I been properly diagnosed, medicated, and treated for ADHD when I was little. Full stop. And so if you're somebody that has struggled with low self-esteem, self-loathing, anxiety, depression, eating disorders, you got diagnosed in your teens and your 20s, and you can't seem to turn the corner on this, I truly want you to consider what I'm about to share with you, what I've learned in the last 6 years of researching this extensively, talking to the world's leading experts about this, among them Dr. Ned Hollowell, who wrote Driven to Distraction. He's like the OG of ADD research. He's at Harvard. He's a world-renowned psychologist, Dr. Daniel Amen, who has scanned my brain and taught me all kinds of stuff about what he sees when he does a brain scan of somebody with ADHD. This is not about organization. ADHD, the definition of ADHD, and this was new to me. ADHD is a chronic neurobiological disorder which affects the brain's structural and chemical capabilities. It impacts the various parts of the brain and the way that your brain communicates with one another. And it is also highly inheritable. And there is good news here. There's a lot of good news that you're going to learn, but here's what we're going to cover, okay? Because this is not just like, hey, let's get some Adderall and party longer. This is a very serious issue, particularly for women, because we are profoundly underdiagnosed. So today, what I'm going to share with you is the 6 surprising signs that I didn't know, that I had all 6 of them, that could be signs that you, too, have adult ADHD. We're going to talk about why women were so profoundly underdiagnosed and have been profoundly underdiagnosed for decades. We're going to talk about the mental health implication when you're not properly diagnosed and when you don't seek either therapeutic or occupational or some sort of medicine treatment for it. You're going to learn about the 4 key differences between how ADHD presents in boys and girls. And we're going to talk about what to do if you think this is you. And finally, we're going to get into what's actually happening in your brain when you have ADHD, because this is so fascinating. I'm going to use a very physical metaphor for you that will have you completely understand this and why this is such a huge issue. And maybe the first place to start is, why are so many women underdiagnosed? Why does this go missing in girls? Well, the answer is this. When they first made ADHD a diagnosis back in the late 70s, they only studied boys. That's it. They only studied boys. And boys present very differently than girls. They have totally different symptoms typically. And this is really important to understand, because when I first heard the term ADHD, I thought of our son. Our son is like the poster boy for ADHD symptoms. Leg is jittery, hands are fidgeting, raising the hand, bumping up and down, got to run to the bathroom, bopping around, do, highly distracted. But what always confused me about him is that he could also laser focus on video games. So I sort of dismissed ADHD because I'm like, well, he can focus on video games, so it must be about his interest in things. No. ADHD has both physical symptoms that you see on the surface, and those are typically what's present in boys. But the reason why girls went profoundly misdiagnosed is because girls typically do not present those physical, jittery, interrupting kind of physical chaos. And boys present 4 key differences with ADHD than girls do. Here they are. Number 1, when a boy has ADHD, they have symptoms that appear on the surface: impulsive behavior, fidgeting, getting distracted, being very physical with their inability to concentrate. Girls, we have the opposite symptoms. Ours are all internal. We're restless, we daydream, we're hard on ourselves, we're forgetful, we're disorganized, and we start to aim it at ourselves as a character flaw. So when you're a girl with ADHD, you daydream. You're disorganized. You're hard on yourself. You make careless mistakes. You might be called a tomboy or super creative. But what happens, and this is why this is so scary, and this is what happened to me, is that when you sit in life or in a classroom and you see all your friends turning things in on time or staying organized, or their lockers are clean and yours is a mess and you're running late, and you start to think you have a character defect. You start to think there's something wrong with you. So you turn it back on yourself. And so that's what happened to me. And it also gets missed because it's internal. We're not sitting there bouncing our leg and jumping and raising our hand. We have the opposite impact. The second key difference between boys and girls is that boys present earlier, typically around the age of 7. Girls, however, present later, on average, like around 12. The third reason why there's a big difference between girls and boys is because boys wear it on their sleeve. They're very physical. They're fidgety. They're frustrated by it. They have trouble controlling their physical outbursts, whereas girls are excellent at hiding this. Why? Well, because we feel the pressure to conform. We feel like something's wrong with us. We do our best to cope. We do our best to look around and see what everybody else is doing. And we start working harder to compensate for what we feel is a character default in us, that we are lesser than, that we're not good enough, that everybody else seems to get this but me, and we hide it. And here's the big fucking difference between girls and boys with ADHD. Boys tend to get better. Girls get worse. And that is exactly what happened to me. I got way worse. Way worse. What goes from daydreaming, following instructions, making careless mistakes, forgetfulness, all-nighters, not being able to stay organized, that chronic struggle turns into, I'm fucked up, there's something wrong with me, and a profound correlation between anxiety, depression, eating disorders, suicidal thoughts. This is not just me, by the way. Let me pull some of the research out because this shit is scary. You can hear me flipping through my papers. I prepared for this because I wanted you to have women with ADHD face the feelings of being overwhelmed and exhausted the same way that men do. However, women increasingly have psychological distress, feel inadequate, low self-esteem, chronic stress. This is extremely common. You feel that your life is out of control or chaos, and daily tasks start to seem impossibly huge. Research shows that ADHD materializes dramatically differently in girls. And one clinical psychologist, Dr. Ellen Littman, this should scare you, says, she wrote the book Understanding Girls with ADHD. The outcomes for girls are horrendously negative compared to boys because ADHD materializes dramatically differently in girls as they get older. Anxiety and depression turn into low self-esteem and self-loathing. That happened to me. And the risk for self-harm and suicide attempts, 4 to 5 times greater for girls with ADHD. This is not about having trouble with homework. This is not about remembering birthdays. Because unlike boys, many of whom just show hyperactivity, girls' symptoms veer inward. And that means we aim all this at ourselves. And that's where the anxiety comes in. That's where the depression comes in. That's where the eating disorders come in. That's where the self-harm come in, is because you actually believe something's wrong with you. And here's what I'm here to say. There's nothing wrong with you. Absolutely nothing wrong with you. In fact, ADHD has a high correlation to being a successful entrepreneur, to being highly creative, to being a problem solver, a risk taker. There is so much beauty in this. But you also need to understand if you're dealing with a neurobiological disorder, which impacts your prefrontal cortex. Most girls that have undiagnosed ADHD, you know what they start to have on the surface? Anxiety. Because, of course, if you're going to go into school every day and you're disorganized and you make careless mistakes and you're hard on yourself and you start to tell yourself there's something wrong with you, of course you're going to feel anxious about going. And it makes perfect sense, right? And if you can't control your ability to pay attention to things, a lot of us start seeking other things we can control. And that's why there are so many co-diagnoses with ADHD and eating disorders and anxiety and depression with girls. And that's exactly what happened to me. In fact, I was treated for decades for anxiety, and I am sitting here telling you right now, I 100% believe the issue I had all along was very simple. I had dyslexia and ADHD, and nobody fucking knew it. And instead, I developed anxiety. Why? Because that's what happens when you have undiagnosed ADHD and dyslexia, and you don't understand why your brain doesn't work the same way as everybody else. You don't understand why you're always late, why you can't get it together, why things are always a mess, why there's clutter around you, why you're constantly missing deadlines or doctor's appointments or leaving your Kleenex on the counter, or you can't forget that. It's relentless. And so, of course, anxiety would develop. And I'm on a mission today to share absolutely everything that I have learned in my own deeply personal research to be a better mother of kids with ADHD and to be a better partner to myself as I live my life as an adult with ADHD. And what I've learned is life-changing. There are things that you can do. There are very surprising signs that this may be something for you. And I need to say right up front, I'm not a doctor. The purpose of this episode is not meant to diagnose you at all. I am here to entertain you with my story, and I am here to educate you based on my personal experience, and I am here to empower you to know that this is a reality for so many women in particular in the world, so that if it rings true for you, you go seek the professional help that's out there to get a very clear answer of what's happening for you. That's what this is about. Because that's how you create a better life.
I'm pulling a reversal and checking in on Mel, who has been an absolute beast trying to write this book. So let's go see what's going on.
How's your book coming?
Oh my God, Chris. I can't believe that you're here. I have had the biggest freaking breakthrough of my life. I have a dyslexic ADHD brain. I am riddled with feelings of inferiority and like this story that I am never going to get this book done. It's not going to be great. It's not going to help you. It has created such writer's block. I've had the biggest breakthrough of my life. I'm going to share with you the secret the secret technique that has unlocked writer's block and created a flow of content. So what I've noticed is being dyslexic, being ADHD, being somebody that is a speaker by nature, I have a hard time getting my thoughts on paper. So I just had this huge breakthrough that I want you to steal. I realized, Chris, that I've been trying to write my book on my laptop. And yes, I've been dictating some of the parts of the book. What do you think? Are you part of this video? I have been dictating on my laptop. This morning, I had the world's biggest breakthrough. I want you to steal this. I sat down. I have my iPad here. Come here. And I went to go start to write the introduction to my new book. I went to start to type, and I hate typing on this thing. So I went to look for my little wireless keyboard, Chris. I didn't have it. So I was forced to use the dictate button. Now, here's the cool thing about using the dictate button on the iPad is what happens is you start to dictate, and then you can use your finger to tap where you're needing to go. And if I don't like what I just dictated, on my laptop, I would delete it. On this, I'm like, F it. I just hit the dictate button and I keep going. I have literally banged out the introduction to my new book in 11 minutes flat. Do you realize I've been trying to write this for a month? And I think it has to do with the fact that when I put on the hat to type, and to move a cursor, it's a different part of my brain than the brain that creates the content. And by simply using an iPad where I can see this and I can touch stuff and I can move it around and then boom, I go like this and now I got something to say. So I touch it here and then I hit return and I'm like, oh, so I have this thing that I want to say right here and I'm not even thinking about it. I'm just letting this fly out of my mouth. It's unbelievable. I'm literally writing my book as I'm talking to you. And what I've realized about my mind is there is something that happens in my mind when I go from thinking a thought and trying to type it out or write it out. The second that I have to organize it with a keyboard and a mouse, I lose all creative focus. I think I'm going to get this book written literally in the next week. I'm so liberated. Please steal this idea. And let me know if it works for you, if it works for your kids that are struggling with homework to dictate like this. Don't use a keyboard, an iPad, a smartphone. You can do it on a computer too with like a tracking pad. I am just so happy I've figured this out.
When did you receive your diagnosis of ADHD?
I was, I think like 47.
How did it change things?
Well, it was amazing. I absolutely amazing. You were recently diagnosed, right?
Yeah.
So it changed everything because I finally had an explanation for something about the way that my mind worked and the way that I felt that made me, for 47 years, feel like there was something defective about me. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And I was diagnosed the way that most women that are adults are diagnosed. And it goes a little something like this. You have a kid. So my husband and I have 3 children, and our youngest, Oakley, was this just amazing kind of casserole of things. And one of the things that he is that he had a lot of trouble in school. We didn't even know that he couldn't read. I mean, talk about being a parent that's asleep at the wheel. We didn't find out that he couldn't read, Stephen, until he was in the 4th grade. And the reason why we didn't know, and the school didn't know, is because he had so overcompensated in the classroom by being so verbal. First kid with the hand up, blah, 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 like talking, that nobody knew that he was having trouble. And all of a sudden, the math problems get harder because they become word problems. All of a sudden, reading comprehension. And, not to mention the fact that he also had dysgraphia, which basically means that it looked like he was writing with his feet. I mean, his handwriting was so bad. And I was befuddled by this because he could literally sit in front of the TV and play video games for hours and have hyper focus and all this dexterity. And so I just thought, oh, he's acting out. He can't stand school. So we have this great teacher in the public school system who says, you really need to get him tested. And I wouldn't test him in the school. And luckily, we were at a point where we could afford to go get, I think it's called a psychographic something. It's like a long word. And sure enough, the testing comes back. And the PhD neuropsych guy is like, yeah, well, he has profound dyslexia. He has profound dysgraphia. He has executive functioning issues, which is basically the conductor or the secretary in the brain sort of helping you stay organized and a couple steps ahead. He has ADHD. And as I'm reading through this report, I'm sitting in the pediatrician's office, Stephen, and I'm looking at this report and I'm reading it, and I look up at his pediatrician who I had become good friends with because we had 3 kids in the practice at this point. And I'm like, Mark, do you think maybe I have ADHD? And he puts his paper down, Stephen, and he goes, do I think you have ADHD? Of course you have ADHD. You are the most ADHD parent in my entire practice. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, Mel, you're brilliant. And yet you never do what you say you're going to do. You will leave here and tell me you're going to call. You never call back. Your kids go years without coming in because you miss all their wellness appointments. You scramble every single year for the physicals that your kids need. And you beg us to take, it is clockwork. Of course you have ADHD. And I look at him, Stephen, and I'm like, why didn't you tell me? He said, because I'm not your doctor. And so I went and I got the testing, Stephen, and turns out, yes, ADHD, dyslexia, same profile as my son. And what was interesting about getting the diagnosis, because I didn't understand what ADHD was. I always thought that ADHD is that you can't pay attention.
Same.
That's not what it is at all.
Mm.
And so learning about what it is and learning that boys and girls present completely differently. So there's an entire generation of women, I don't know if you know this, but there's an entire generation of women called the lost generation. And what happened is when they were studying ADHD, I guess in the late 60s and early 70s, they only looked at boys. And so boys tend to show the symptoms of ADHD around the age of 7. And it typically is around the hyperactivity or the inability to kind of like focus and control their body movements. Girls, on the other hand, don't start displaying symptoms until about the age of 12. And the symptoms are very different. Girls become inattentive, but in a kind of daydreaming fashion. They become a little bit more disorganized, and they aim all of this back at themselves. And so as you become kind of more inward and you are inattentive and you're disorganized and you start to wonder what's wrong with you. And now plus the average age of girls for puberty is right around then too. So all this other stuff is starting to happen and hormones are starting to change. If you don't get properly diagnosed and treated, and by treated, I mean the whole array of things that you can do, whether you're talking about medication or just the different habits that you can have or systems that you can develop to support yourself. If you don't get properly tested and you don't address it, do you know what the number one thing that happens? You develop anxiety.
Oh, really?
Well, of course, because you're sitting in a classroom and you can't get yourself to focus and you're disorganized and you start to feel this sense of alarm that you're going to walk into a test and you're not going to be able to do it, that you're going to yet again open your locker and the stuff's going to fly everywhere, that yet again you're going to forget your friend's birthday or you're going to forget to do this thing. And so all of this anxiety rises to the surface. So get this. So they call us the lost generation of women because what do you suppose if we were not diagnosed? So I'm 55. If I'm in elementary school in the late 70s and and they've only studied boys. And so none of this is on anybody's radar screen. You now have a generation of women who are developing anxiety at big levels in high school and college. I was textbook. And so we get treated for the anxiety and medicated for it without addressing the underlying issue all along, which was undiagnosed ADHD. So for me, it was absolutely life-changing. And it was life-changing to understand that ADHD is not about your inability to focus. It is about the fact, and I'm sure you probably have dug into this and you know this, but for anybody, anytime I talk about this, the number of women that are going to write in, the number of dads that will write in about their daughters, the number of people that say, "Oh my God, I had anxiety in high school too, and now I've been diagnosed with ADHD, and it was because of my kid going through this." And this is exactly my story. It is happening over and over and over again. And so here's what really also helped me, Stephen, and it's this. Understanding that focus and the ability to focus in appropriate ways requires two different neural networks in your brain. And you can think about it this way. If you think about, the prefrontal cortex, this kind of part of your brain, really has the job of almost being like a conductor of an orchestra. This is the best example that I've heard in terms of what's happening if you have ADHD. And what's happening is if you think about an orchestra and the orchestra's warming up, right? And it's like, and the drums are ting, 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 and people are shuffling in their seats. We know that sound, right? And then all of a sudden, the conductor's like, tip, 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 tip. And everybody's silent, right? In order to conduct an orchestra, you got to be able to do two things at once. You got to be able to lower the volume on the strings over here. And then you got to be able to amplify the focus on the percussion over here. And what happens when this part of your brain is not switching properly is you are like Mel Robbins in college. And I would be with my books, and I would be in the stacks at Baker Library at Dartmouth College, and I'd be there because I'm going to study, right? And my orchestra conductor cannot shush anything. So the second I sit down, if I'm going to study, I have to do two things. I have to be able to quiet all the ambient noise. I have to be able to quiet all the signaling in my body. So that what? I can amplify my attention on what I'm reading. When this part of your brain doesn't work, what ends up happening, or at least this is the way that it's been explained to me, is that I can't focus on my books because I'm paying attention to the fact that my stomach is grumbling and I hear people walking, and then I'm looking around, and then I'm paying attention to the fact that I have to go to the bathroom. So then I'm up, then I'm walking around. And that is how I lived for a very, very long time.
Do you think that's a survival response?
What do you mean?
Becoming very aware of your surroundings. You know what I mean?
Has anyone ever researched whether or not there is a link between trauma and ADHD?
Yes.
And
Gabor Mate, I believe, is the one that's made a pretty compelling case to me that ADHD appears to be linked to childhood trauma, which is I'm going to butcher this, so please forgive me, everybody. The case he made to me was that when you have a chaotic or traumatic or stressful childhood, as a survival mechanism, you learn to tune out. And that's protective. So if your parents are always screaming in the house, for example, it makes a lot of sense for you to learn to tune out in that moment, but also to know when to tune in obsessively. And maybe that's the hyperfocus bit. The bit that he really stressed to me was that kids that go through some kind of interpretation of a stressful environment at a young age or a traumatic environment are more likely to have ADHD because they've learned to tune out in order to sort of conserve and survive. It's like my rough understanding of it.
Well, it makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you also have a really chaotic environment, it might not be safe for you to tune out.
Yeah.
And so you've got to stay in that hypervigilant mode, which I think would fry the conductor in your brain.
It does, yeah.
Because you're both paying attention to the survival signals in your body at the same time as the chaos in your house. And even if you're tuning out the parents who are screaming at each other, you are still tuned into it because heaven forbid it escalates.
Yeah.
You got to know.
Yeah.
And so I think it makes perfect sense, honestly. But it was just a game changer. And it was a game changer to know kind of the distinction between boys and girls and the link with anxiety in terms of it developing in a pronounced way for those of us that have had this experience of having this as a diagnosis, learning it late in life, and then tracing it back and going, oh my God, I've been treated for anxiety for all these years when the real issue was this attention issue. And if you take Gabor Mate's theory, which I think is probably accurate, dial it back even further, and it's probably some form of childhood trauma that put a kink in the wires. An environmental trigger is something that you encounter visually in a space that cues a certain thought or behavior. And a lot of us are aware of triggers in the negative sense. Oh, you trigger me. Oh, that sound triggers this. But you can use environmental triggers in a very positive and profound way. And I talk about environmental triggers extensively in the episode that we did called 5 Essential Hacks to Make New Habits Stick. And I love environmental triggers. And so for sure, this tattoo and your tattoo, that is a visual reminder that triggers a certain positive way of thinking. But you can use a Post-it note. In fact, this is the assignment, everybody. I want you to come up with a phrase, and you can borrow one that you've heard us say today and try it on for size, because it's sort of like you got to see if it fits. And how do you know if the phrase fits? You're not resisting it. You're not arguing against it. You're not saying the phrase, I'm beautiful. Yeah, but. No, you got to come up with something that feels right. It's sort of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, right? One's too little, one's too big, one feels just right. That's how you try this on. Then I want you to take a Sharpie, a permanent pen, and write it on a Post-it note. And stick that sucker on your mirror or on your laptop somewhere in your physical space that you're going to bump into it. Your bedside table, the way that Tracy does. Heck, if you're thinking about a tattoo, before you get a tattoo, make the tattoo in a Sharpie on your arm. And, I got to say, I don't want to hear any of you saying, Mel, I got a tattoo because of you. Like you get a tattoo because you want a tattoo. Do not have me pressure you to get a tattoo. And I so believe in this. Don't you believe in this?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, the environmental trigger piece just makes such a difference.
Yeah. You have an interesting environmental trigger on your bulletin board. It's a photo of you. Why are you giggling?
I knew somehow you were going to raise this topic again.
Why? Guys, he is the cutest photo that our friend Jenny Maloney took. And it's a black and white photo of Chris. And he's looking off to the side and he's sort of smiling. And he posted it. He pinned it to his bulletin board. And he wrote in a Sharpie, you, with an arrow pointing at himself. And it sits right on his bulletin board at his desk. And I can see you tearing up. What does that photo mean? What does it trigger you to think?
Just to, I think it's I don't think it was, I was prompted to print the picture and tack it on my board as a piece of a homework assignment in a class that I'm taking, where I found myself through dream work and dream analysis to just need to be reminded that I'm perfect the way I am, that I'm yes, I'm good enough, or that who I am is who I am. And so it was a spontaneous response to work that I was doing in this class to say this was one of those hacks or habits I was going to develop, was to look at that picture every day and see me as I am and embrace and love that person.
Oh, This is for your master's in psych?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I think everybody's going to steal that one too.
I mean, I don't have a mirror in my office, so instead I put a picture of myself.
Environmental trigger, everybody. For people that are brand new to the idea of healing, of trauma, of nervous system dysregulation, by asking you a question. Do you believe that the majority of breakdowns or mental health issues that we face as adults go back to the issue of stress, trauma, hypervigilance that you experienced during childhood?
I absolutely. And that also is to include, however, the structural brain neurological changes. This is where we can, I think, as a field, get caught in a little bit of the chicken or the egg, because again, because stress does imprint on us biologically, genetically, a lot of us do then see or born with even structural changes, right, in our brain, imbalances in neurotransmitters. Again, the field is still the psychology field that is, and the medical field, if I'm being perfectly honest, is still learning, is still evolving, is still growing. And it took until, within the past decade for us to realize that one of the number one things, I'm sure maybe some listeners have heard of, neurotransmitters, right? This idea that when you're diagnosed with a mental illness, whatever it might be, your neurotransmitters are off. Your a hormone in your body that impacts our mood. While that is absolutely part of the story, for a very long time, we located the neurotransmitter production and maintenance, right, in our brain. And now we understand that it isn't just our brain that creates and produces and uses neurotransmitters. It is our gut, right? So now we have another whole part of the body that is impacted by decisions that we're making, food we're eating, pollutants that are in, toxins that are in the food that we're eating, habits around eating the food that, again, were passed through generation. So to simply answer your question, we can't localize it to just one exact factor, in my opinion, which is why I'm such a proponent. And I've shifted the way that I work and think and practice and teach into a more holistic model, because it's all of it. And the reality of it is there are structural changes. There are imbalances in our nervous system. There's dysregulation in our nervous system and imbalances in our neurotransmitter, I should say, that are creating then the symptoms that are, resulting in diagnoses. And my hope is to take the whole picture into account and to give people the opportunity to explore the deeper underlying causes, because that's the area where we can begin to intervene by making new choices, by creating a different internal environment for ourselves, by creating a different external environment for us to live into, can then help us resolve some of those longstanding symptoms.
So I'm going to give you a personal example, okay? Because I think it will help people start to process where we're going to go with this conversation by thinking about this example. And I will be the emotionally immature parent in the example, okay? So we have a daughter who has just started to talk openly about the fact that she feels very stuck in life. In her words, that she does not feel alive, that there are very few experiences happening in her day-to-day life where she feels truly alive. And the other thing, and this is sort of a little joke, is that we say, we love you because you don't take yourself that seriously. She's really, really funny, but you take everything else so seriously. So she is the typical hypervigilant, on top of everything, stressed out, got to get everything right. And when I apply your work to this situation, knowing that she's talking to a therapist, I say that as her mother, when she was born, I had severe postpartum depression. I had an incredibly traumatic birth, and I was, in your words, emotionally immature, which means I personally, as a new mom and just as a human being at the age of 29 or 30, I could not handle my emotions. I screamed, I vented, I, was very unpredictable. And on top of it, for the first 8 weeks of her life, because the postpartum depression was so severe, Dr. Nicole, and I was so heavily medicated because it was a dangerous situation psychologically and physically for me, I couldn't take care of her. And she has, now that she's an adult and in therapy, and she just did, some really interesting guided psychedelic therapies, has had now a memory of that period of her life as an infant and really being in distress, wanting me to come. And just remembering my husband coming and one of our close friends that would sit with me while my husband was at work while I was very sick. And she also has had this sort of experience in therapy of realizing that I really wanted to be there. But that core experience very much cemented a kind of experience of the world for her. And I, of course, was just passing down the lineage of stressed out, volatile, intense, not that warm kind of behavior that I grew up around. When I look all the way through my lineage of, immigrant working in coal mines, domestic servants, farmers, like work, hard work. And I look at her, and as, she's talking about a job and she's talking about doing this, and I'm thinking, actually, this is about you healing. I hate to say it this way, so please correct me, but I feel like the damage I fucking did to you because I didn't know any better.
Yeah, I want to commend a couple things here, Mel. First, your honesty in sharing these experiences, and also the environment that you've since created. It sounds like, to the extent that your daughter is able to, right, begin to share these realities, these conscious awarenesses that she's having, because that is a gift, to be able to communicate honestly with those closest to us, especially those that might have been a participant in whatever the circumstances that we lived in our past, in our earliest life. That is such a gift, because few families, I think, have at any time. And I know my family in particular, now we're just recently starting to be able to share things with each other in honesty, share what our different realities, I have two other siblings, are, and allow that to be the case. So that is absolutely something to celebrate. And the reality of it is, when we don't have the resources to take care of ourselves, and when we're stuck in this dysregulation that we're talking about in our nervous system, we're stuck in a survival mode in and of itself of our own. And so my heart, I actually felt myself welling up in emotion hearing you share that story, for not only your daughter, for you as well. Like you were sharing the awareness that she had of you wanting, right, to be present. And I think postpartum depression is one of those rarely talked about experiences that is so, I think a lot of times it's highlighted on how it is for the child of that disconnection, though, how painful it is for the parent who in their heart, wants to be. And I think this is the case with all of us, as with all parents, is there's a lot of well-meaning, well-intentioned individuals that are of two minds within themselves, if they're even aware of it or not, of wanting to show up in whatever way, in a tune, to connect it in a loving way, oftentimes wanting to reverse patterns that they know didn't serve them from their own childhood, yet not being able to, because the reality, and I use the term survival mode to really highlight the reality that when we're in survival mode, and this is all just driven by our nervous system, so it's not anything logical, our survival is our priority, which means that a child, a loved one, a partner, right, isn't where our attention and our resources need to be allocated at that moment. It's quite literally in us getting through the next few moments of life. And this might sound dire, which is why, again, I'm just offering that this is all driven by our ability to survive, by our evolution as a human. So this is, again, where we are of two minds, where we might desperately want to show up, to connect, to be attuned to our child, and our body might not be prioritizing that child at all. It might be prioritizing us and our survival and us making it through the next moment, however difficult that moment is. And so again, I just want to, thank you for your honesty in shining the light on a topic as this, because I've spoken and worked with, in my past practice, a lot of women who were so shameful about the experience of having, that deep rooted depression, even of, this is another controversial, I think, thing to admit, of maybe being of two minds about how it is to actually be a mother, right? There might be a very well-intentioned part that does want to show up and does want to be in care of a child. And the reality of needing to be in care of someone else for 24 hours a day is very difficult. It's very challenging. And there might be then conflicts in and of itself. So again, I want to commend you for your honesty. And I want to commend the environment that's being created in your home where these things can be talked about. Because I think the more we're able to, again, be non-judgmentally honest with ourselves and with other people, to relieve ourselves, like you're even sharing. When I look back in time, I see the same patterns, just like I experienced with my mom. When I look back at her family experience, it's cold, it's disconnection. She literally had a father who came home from work. He was the financial support of the household, put up his newspaper, and quite literally ignored the children. So it's not surprising that the mother then emotionally that I, was born into didn't have the tools to emotionally connect, no matter how much she wanted to do different, and knew that that was a painful experience for herself. She was locked in her own survival mode and was just simply unable to.
Yeah, I agree. And in sharing the story, it actually is somewhat liberating for me, because I don't want to pass down that generational cycle or trauma of being in survival mode and having a conflicted relationship with giving and receiving love. And what I can so profoundly see is that since I'm catching this in myself at 47, and I'm still working on it, my kids probably, I'd say at least 6 or 7 times a week go, "Watch your tone, Mom. Watch your tone of voice." For me is when my emotional immaturity kicks in, when my inability to tolerate something. Mel Robbins is now her 8-year-old self because her tone of voice goes nasty, just like I heard in my household the tone of voice in the adults around me go nasty when I was 8 years old. And so I want to make it very clear as a takeaway for people that if you are resonating with this idea of, being in breakdown or feeling stuck or feeling disconnected in your adult life, first of all, we all go through it. If not a couple times, right? A couple big breakdowns everyone goes through. So it's normal, but it's not, it's good news, because you're awakening that your current way of living on autopilot or being shut down, or in the words of my daughter, not feeling alive, that's not how you're wired or meant to live. And so this moment of consciousness is an opportunity. And I will also highlight that through my own example, the first place I want you to look is I want you to look at Dr. Nicole's work, because what she's saying is the first place to look is in your childhood, and how you have gotten to a point as an adult where your ability to tolerate discomfort emotionally is no longer serving the kind of life you want to live. And I'm willing to say, through experiences I did not mean to create for my daughter, I taught her hyper vigilance. Like, she had to become the adult. I wasn't even able to be present. And I feel terrible about that. Do I wish I could go back and wave a magic wand? Absolutely. And I know for both of us, there's this huge opening present for both of our healing, not to mention our ability to have a mature, loving relationship on our own terms versus being in a relationship that is driven by the patterns of our lineage and what we were taught when we were children. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. I'm shaking my head very ravenously over here because, I think it's important for me to state as well is I still have moments where for me, my reactivity comes out as passive aggressive, snarky, underhanded comments where I'm not able to directly say it is how I feel to another person. Again, because without that attunement in childhood, without that safety, I learned the act of suppressing it, of going away on my spaceship and not ever saying what was really wrong. I also have a habit of disconnecting from my loved ones, my relationships, of literally going and walling myself off in my bedroom and then holding them responsible for not coming in and not being connected and not supporting me when I need it. And I like to use this visual of it. It's as if I have my hand held out in front of me and I'm demanding, sometimes even with daggers on the end of it, and then demanding someone come and give me a hug. And again, all of this for me, you said something really beautiful that I think is important to touch on. All of this goes back to, for me, the inability to be emotionally connected, to give and receive love in my childhood. And as counterintuitive as that sounds, especially for all of us in relationship, many of us, few of us, I should say, in adulthood, actually have had that lived experience of giving and receiving love for being who we are, for just sharing how it is for us, what we think, what we feel with another individual. So while we might, and this was so much, of my life for so long, all I desperately wanted was to be connected. I would leave partners because you weren't able to connect with me. I didn't feel close to you. And it took until, the awakening that began in my 30s, my 30s, my early 30s, because it was several years of time before I was able to see myself as holding those daggers out, see all of the ways I was disconnected from my own authentic emotions, not sharing them with other people. So how am I going to be deeply and authentically known to someone else? I never gave anyone the opportunity, because for me, it felt so scary, so vulnerable, so threatening, that having those daggers out and blaming you for not coming closer was that safe zone. It was just a replication of that early experience, again, that was created in my household with all of my family members, but namely around my own mom, who wasn't equipped, didn't understand, probably had a deep-rooted desire, like I was sharing earlier, to be emotionally connected, but didn't know how herself.
Yeah. I mean, we only can do what we've been trained to do until we wake the hell up and heal ourselves and teach ourselves to do something different. I read that for every 1,000 barbers and beauticians that go through your 4-step training process in terms of the skills that you're teaching them to be mental health advocates, you're reaching 1 million people.
Yes.
That's incredible. You're reaching 3 million people a year by training barbers and beauticians to be mental health advocates as they are listening to their clients who are sitting in their chair.
Yes.
And what does the training look like? There are 4 parts to it, and I would love for you to explain it, because these 4 parts are things that we can all learn how to do for people in our lives.
Absolutely. So the 4 parts of the training is active listening, validation, positive communication, and stigma reduction. It is a 4-point formula that I like to call it, that therapeutically is used in a lot of therapeutic sessions with therapists and patients. But we utilize it in an advocacy space in regards to how barbers and stylists can help their clients by using these tools as they're cutting hair. So it is, a perfect example. It's a conversation that they're having with their client every week about how's life going, how's work going. But they can lean in and use these skills if their client is going through a challenge at home or at work. And they are able to listen better. They're able to, communicate in a positive way. They're able to reduce stigma and uplift mental health and embrace it more or less than saying, hey, you shouldn't worry about that, or hey, just pray about it, it's going to be okay. And really be able to use these skills as a promotion of promoting a healthy mental health and emotional journey in their mental health journey, particularly. So it's really I always like to say it's the perfect way of doing a grooming session, making someone feel good on the outside and in the inside.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that.
When we've worked with these barbers and provided the training and support, it's really empowered them individually, probably just as much as it has empowered their clients. And I think that's something that's very important, because as we empower them to be their best self, it really helps to connect with the broader audience in the community, because that's really the purpose of the actual training, is that if we can reach someone, reach them, that they can reach other people, and those people can reach even more people in their household and their communities, and it can really become a ripple effect. And so I feel like that in itself has been an impact.
Can you, like, let's just say, let's just put us in the chair. Somebody comes in, I plop down in the chair, and you're my barber, and I'm having a hard day. What do you do as the barber that is part of the Confess Project?
So it can lead us, hey, I noticed that your day is going hard. Man, I know, you was here last week. What's going on? How's everything? How can I be supportive? In this moment, you are actively listening to their feedback that they may have given you. You're also showing that you can communicate in a positive way, but you're also, even just by those few words, you're even starting to validate them, and so maybe
Mm.
their next response is, "Man, I'm having a hard time at work. I'm about to lose my job. I'm behind on my bills," and it could even go to, I understand that you're going through this, and I'm with you here in this moment. I'm compassionate. We also provide the barbers, I'm sorry, with resources in regards to also how they can support individuals that may need housing, that may need, sign up for healthcare. So outside of the training that we offer, we provide a resource directory to each barbershop to be able to help people with whether that's getting employment or whether that's just general resources, whether that's bill pay, so outside of, because we recognize that mental health can be impacted by people's daily walk in life.
Oh, of course.
Uh,
Like I was just thinking about that example. I'm about to lose my job. That's a
yeah,
situation that causes anxiety. And if you
correct.
start to spiral in
Yep,
your head, you're not going to be able to problem solve
yep,
and to get ahead of it and to be
yep.
proactive. You're going to get trapped in your thoughts and you're going to feel ashamed. And, one of the things that I found as we were preparing for this interview is that we polled our audience of more than 5 million people. And I was really sadly not surprised that roughly 1 out of every 5 people that responded to some questions that we put up on Instagram said there was no one, not one person that they
Wow,
felt like they could go to.
wow.
And when we asked them to name Lorenzo, the quality of the person that they could talk to, the same word kept coming up over and over and over again: non-judgmental,
Mm,
non-judgmental. And I think when you think about training your barber, your hairstylist, your beautician in these skills of active listening, of validating, of leaning in, of asking questions, what's going on? How can I help you? It's normal to struggle, but you can't let the worry get you down. You might want to call this number and get some
yep,
help, so
yep,
that,
yep,
like, when you train somebody just to do those small things, you're training people to help in a non-judgmental way. And I think one of the reasons why we confess so much to our hairdressers, I mean, I know I do. She knows more about me than my therapist, for crying out loud, is because I just kind of feel like it's not going to go anywhere and that
yep,
she's not judging me.
yep, yep.
And that's what you've found too. In fact, the Confess Project has participated in this big study at Harvard Medical School. Can you tell everybody a little bit about that study and what you found by training and amplifying this incredible group of barbers and beauticians to be mental health advocates?
Yeah, so there was 32 barbers who participated across 8 states in the Harvard research study, and it lasted for about 8 to 9 months. It was very interesting. Our barbers was honestly uber excited. It was started off as not as exciting because you have a large institution coming in wanting to talk with people about mental health, but
Mm.
I relatively say that it was an exciting opportunity. One of the things that we really recognized early, as the study became about, and even as it's now published, it is recently we've been published in an international journal, to really show the great work that happened. But barbers, um, are shown to be mental health and suicide prevention gatekeepers,
Wow.
and also can be an aid to help decrease interpersonal community violence as well. But also, something we saw in the research is that women barbers and stylists are just as instrumental because they are a great connection to children and their mental health.
Mm.
And it's even to say as well, the study revealed that the barbers can be this framework that we have can be beneficial to even domestic violence. So it was many, and that's just kind of high level results that we got out of it. And that goes along to also say that, the Confess Project, 90% of our barbers that has participated rather receive therapy in the barbershop rather than going to a clinic.
Now, why do you think that is?
Um, Comfortability, honestly,
Mm-hmm.
and I believe the cultural component, and I think even environmental. Again, we go back to the stigma and shame of mental health. Going to see which some of our barbers say, I don't want to go see a shrink inside of in a clinic, and so
Yes.
yeah.
Well, because we've been doing it kind of, but now you're bringing in the training. And so one of the things that's so fascinating about this is that people go back to their barber or their beautician over and over. And so this relationship develops, and you see somebody and you tell your barber and your beautician everything. And so I would imagine that it's like the perfect opportunity to really give people support, especially at a moment in time, Lorenzo, where people feel so lonely, they feel isolated. Most people don't have the resources to hire a therapist or a mental health professional. And you are providing this kind of service and intervention right at the chair. And the people in the chair don't even realize it. I mean, this is incredible.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's just we're glad that obviously barbers and stylists have been seen as cultural assets, as community leaders, and glad that we're now helping them to use their assets in a greater way around supporting people, supporting their mental health, supporting their well-being, because we know when one's mental health is great, their well-being and who they are as a person will shine even better.
Can you give us just a couple examples of how barbers and beauticians that have gone through this training have made a difference already in small ways and big ways?
Yeah, so we've had barbers and stylists that has went through this program to for their own selves um, to check themselves into a rehab,
Mm.
to build a stronger relationship with their children, build stronger relationship better in their marriages, but all the way enough more to help save someone from taking their life by suicide,
Wow.
um, and dying by suicide rather. So we've seen it at the very most minimal state of relationship, better boundaries, better health, better well-being, to saving lives. And so that's how impactful this training they're using that's tied around active listening and how to communicate better, how to reduce stigma around mental health, but also how to get someone to help that may be in a crisis.
Well, it's true. Like if you think about even some of the little day-to-day struggles that people face, Lorenzo, we don't talk about it. But if you're sitting in the barber's chair and you're kind of looking at yourself and this person that you know is behind you and they're touching you and they're like, how's your day going? You tend to start to spill the beans. And so sometimes the difference between you like just drowning in heartache over a breakup or you not knowing what to do about a kid of yours that's struggling in school, like
Yeah.
the difference can be made by one person listening and making a suggestion that makes you start to feel like you could do something or this is a resource that you could call. And you, through the Confess Project, are training barbers and beauticians to do that for people. That's extraordinary. Hey, it's Mel. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoyed that video, by God, please subscribe because I don't want you to miss a thing. Thank you so much for being here. We've got so much amazing stuff coming. Thank you so much for sending this stuff to your friends and your family. I love you. We create these videos for you. So make sure you subscribe. Mwah.